So I hope everybody had a great weekend. Um, Feels like summer is in full swing and we're kind of winding down on the whole being trapped in our houses and all that. So feels pretty good. So this is going to be a really fun topic today, and it's about honoring our strengths and our weaknesses. And it's actually one of my favorite topics. But before we start, I just want to do a quick cleansing breath. So we're just going to do breathe in through your nose and then just let out through your mouth and just let the air just drop out of your chest, okay? All righty. Always feels so good. So honoring our strengths and our weaknesses. Now, I want to frame this conversation quickly. So in the Western tradition that we were brought up in, we've been brought up in a bifurcated environment where things are basically reduced to either good or bad, right? So things are either right or wrong, good or bad, male, female, good job, bad job, all these types of things. And so our brains basically have been taught to think about things in either one or the other, as opposed to looking at them as being complete. And so honoring our strengths and our weaknesses is about completeness, because you need to have strengths and weaknesses to be complete. And even the term strengths and weaknesses, I think I phrased it that way just so that we would understand it, but even that's not the right vernacular. We'll get into that in just a minute. So one place to start, and I would encourage you to maybe do a little bit of your own research on this, is the whole yin-yang. Now, at kind of a basic level, it's a little bit about opposites. You've got this graphic here where it talks about things as being hot or cold, or left or right, or up or down, or the moon and the sun, things like that. But it's really greater than that. It's the dualism about, and I'm just going to read a little bit from the slide, that the concept of dualism, describing how seemingly opposites are contrary forces, strengths, weaknesses would be contrary, may actually be complementary and interconnected. And that's really what we're going to talk about, is how they are interconnected and really interdependent. Because you can't have a strength without a weakness. Like, you don't know what hot is until you know cold, and vice versa. And so it's that dualism and about understanding how everything connects. And that, so, at a very surface level, which is all this is, we could go into the yin yang, we could do a whole session on that. And maybe we will if you guys want. However, right, just understand it as a dualism, that everything is connected and everything is meant to be the way it is. Otherwise, it would be different. So I want you to just take a minute and write down, 1, 2, or 3, what you think are your strengths and what you think your weaknesses are. Now, no one's going to see this but you, and there is no right or wrong or good or bad to any of it. Just write down what you believe your strengths and your weaknesses are. And we'll just take 60 seconds to do that. All right, so if you're still thinking about it while we're going through this, obviously you can continue to write them down or you can go back to it. So let's talk about left brain and right brain. Now, again, in how we were brought up, we would say things like, oh, well, he's a right brainer or she's a left brainer. And we both have 2 hemispheres of the brain, and they both work just great if we allow them to. And here's how both sides of the mind work. So there's simple ways to look at it. The right side of your brain, okay, will see pictures. The left side will see words. That's basically how it works. In this diagram, you've got the left side is computer programming, and the right side is seeing pictures and flowers and things like that. And that's how our minds are put together. But now we need both. Like, we can't, so if you find somebody who's like super analytical and they're living more in their left brain, they're living more in analysis, okay, then you know, they tend to be out of balance. It's the same thing if you're living more in the right brain. If you're living more in the right brain and you're, you know, kind of daydreaming all the time and all that, well, you know, you're probably forgetting to pay your bills, right? So it's the reason why you have both. And it's important to understand. And what's a fun exercise is during your day, start to be aware of when you're in your left brain and when you're in your right brain. And it's kind of fun to do. So, you know, when you're reading directions for something, or you're trying to figure something out, or someone sends you an email and you go like, it's like a word equation, right? Well, all of a sudden that's in your left brain. But if you've got to like sort out pictures, or there's something, you know, that's you know, more artistic, right? Then you're more in your right brain, and you use them all the time. A lot of it gets down to how you identify with it. So if you're in a profession that identifies with, let's say, computer programming, then you're going to identify yourself as being a left brainer, and you're going to minimize the power of your of the right side of your brain, or your right hemisphere, which is the more creative side. So that's the reason why, like, we all toggle back and forth, but it's a matter of, do we recognize that? So what I want you to do is, we go through the day, I want you to think about that. Ooh, is this a left brain activity or right brain activity? It's kind of fun. And then you can see how they both go back together. And what come back and forth, and what happens is when they're synchronized, it's called cohesion. You're cohesive. And that's what happens through meditation. Maybe we'll talk about meditation at another time. So we need both for balance. So the reason why we have both an analytical side and a more you know, a feeling-based side, or you know, a touch and feel side, is because we need the balance for both. And I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but I kind of picked this image because the rocks that are stacked on top of one another are called guide stones. And it's what you know, many ancient cultures, you know, in North American, the Native Americans used as simply to guide the way. So like, you'd see these on the side of the road sometimes, or on beaches or rocky areas where, or if you're climbing you know, a mountain or something, or hiking, you'll see the guide stones, and that's what those are. So we need both our strengths and our weaknesses for us to have balance. So here's an expression that I really like. I think we can all relate to it. If I'm using my strengths and I'm only focusing on my strengths, then I'm like a hammer. And if I'm a hammer, everything is a nail. Got me? Got me on that one? If I'm a hammer, everything is a nail. And so what happens is, when we live only in our strengths, and we minimize what we would call our weaknesses, or the other side of our personality, or the other side of our skill sets that might be maybe not as developed, but they serve a purpose, okay? Or maybe it's an area that I'm not as comfortable with. When we get into that state where we're the hammer and all we're doing is banging on that nail, okay? What happens is, and we've all done it, is that we end up spending more time doing more of what we're used to and getting less results. Because what happens, the tendency is, if I'm not getting results that I want, and I spend 2 hours doing it, well then obviously I must need to spend 3 hours, or 4 hours, or 5 hours. And that's not the case. That's when you should be looking at, well, maybe there's another way to do that. Or maybe, you know, maybe what I thought was a weakness really is kind of a strength. I should spend more time over here, as opposed to always being that hammer and always banging on the nail. And I think that's another fun metaphor that we can use during, you know, during our days, is the hammer and the nail. Am I being a hammer right now? Because if I am, I should stop, and then just survey what's going on around me and come up with a different strategy. And so understanding our natural strengths and weaknesses or how we've developed over time, it's a matter of embracing both. Because if you wrote down your strengths and weaknesses, okay, when you want to look at them, avoid the binary trap, okay, or singular trap of saying, I'm really good at this stuff, I'm really not good at this stuff. And here's the embracing part, is that they are binary, okay? They are collective, okay? I couldn't be good at some of these things, or I wouldn't know I was good at some of these things if I didn't struggle at some of these. You need both. And that's part about embracing it. And so if I were to use kind of a sports or a physical fitness metaphor, so if I spend all my time developing my chest region, but I don't do corresponding exercises on my back, okay, then I'm eventually going to become out of balance. Now, it might mean I arch a little bit. It might mean that I've got my back or my shoulders will be out of alignment, but somehow or another, I'm going to be out of balance. It would be the same thing if I spend a lot of time developing my thigh muscles, my quadriceps, but I didn't spend any time on my hamstrings. I'm going to get injured at some point, because it's all about balance. And that's what honoring our strengths and weaknesses are. It's all about understanding that balance. And so another way to look at it is think about our bodies and how kind of odd it would be that, well, I've developed my pectoral muscles, but I haven't developed anything in my shoulders. It doesn't make any sense, right? You're just naturally going to be out of balance. So it's another way to understand it. There is a hierarchy of competency, which has been around a long time, but I really enjoy it. I think it helps us understand where we are in the process of almost anything. So anytime that we start something new, now I'm going to say this on a weakness side, something maybe I'm not as good at, but maybe I'd like to be. So you start basically being unconsciously incompetent. And what unconsciously incompetent means is that I just don't know what I don't know. So I'm just going to go do this thing and I'm going to figure it out along the way. And that's one of the things that really stops people in tracks from change. It's one of the things that really makes change difficult for people, is that being unconsciously incompetent means you're in totally new territory. Then you move up to being consciously incompetent, which means I know I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to keep doing it until I figure it out. Then you move to consciously competent, which means I know how to do this, but I have to think about it. I have to think about it every step of the way. And then you move to unconsciously incompetent, where it's just muscle memory. And that's the process we go through when we're learning anything new. And that's also the process we would go through where we would take something like maybe what we would consider a weakness or something I'm not as developed in. And I would start the process of maybe balancing that out a little bit. And so if I understand, this is almost like a permission slip to say, here's how the process is going to go. Don't worry about it. These are the steps. I don't care who you are. Even Einstein went through these. These are the steps you're going to go through as you're learning something new, and it's perfectly fine. And that's how we start to get the balance between strengths and weaknesses. So we were talking about the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. And so success or proficiency, let's say, in understanding our strengths and weaknesses is living in between. And I like this graphic, this picture, because it's about living in between, right? We're living in between our strengths, things that we're kind of naturally good at, or things we've trained on that we're really good at, and these other things that we need to know. Maybe we're not as strong at them, but if I become stronger here, I become stronger here. So if I take a look at the things I'm not as good at that need more work, and I get better at them, that's naturally going to make me better over here. And that's the reason why they're interconnected, because you really can't have one without the other. We would have no idea if we didn't have nighttime. We would have no idea that we're in daytime. We wouldn't know, because there's no comparison. Same thing with Same thing with hot or cold. We wouldn't know. And so if you think about your strengths and weaknesses, it's about living in between them. Not being the hammer and not always focusing on the strengths, but understanding that I need both of them. And that as maybe I lessen one, I spend a little more time in the other, I become better balanced and I become more interconnected. And it's really not about being good or bad. And so, and I was probably maybe a little lazy language around this topic, is it really isn't about being good or bad. Everything we do is always in a case, is always in everything we do is always in a condition of being developed. It doesn't matter what we do. Everything we do is always in a state of being developed. And so you have these things that you know, maybe I'm a little uncomfortable with, or I don't think I'm as good at. You have them so that it gives you balance against the things that you're stronger at. And again, think about it in terms of the hammer. You don't always want to be the hammer. So in practice, some things to do in your copious free time this week. Be aware that the things you like to do are based mostly on your strengths. So if you like to do something, okay, it's typically because it's more of a strength. But be careful not to do too much of it where you're not developing anything else. Things that might feel more challenging fall into that weakness category, and you're going to want to do a little more of that, right? Now, I mean, I know for me, if I could just run outside or run on the treadmill every day, I would. The problem is it's not good for my body, right? So I have to do elliptical or I have to do bike. I'm not good at either bike or elliptical, but I know I have to do it for me to maintain, right? To maintain balance. It's the same thing. And you want to challenge yourself to do more of what you would consider maybe your weaknesses or the parts that are kind of lesser developed that need more development. And that's going to give you more balance. And it's about being aware of it. So again, we're always living. We always want to be living in between both. We want to be aware of the fact, even if I'm going to be the hammer, okay? I want to be aware that I'm the hammer. I don't want to be unaware of that, right? I don't want to be unconsciously, right, having an activity. And on the things that are under development, it's the same thing. I want to be spending more time, as I'm spending more time in that area, I want to know that I'm going to want to be aware of the fact, okay, that I'm spending time in an area that needs more development. And all of them are okay. And I go back to the original slide we were talking about, the yin-yang. They're all interconnected. You have your strengths and weaknesses for a very specific reason. Otherwise, you wouldn't have them. Otherwise, we all would have just, you know, arrived here perfect. So I hope this was helpful. I think next week what we're going to talk about are triggers, because the two go together. What triggers us, triggers certain behaviors, frustration, happiness, all that. So I think that'll be the next topic for next week. So good to be with everybody, and have a great week. Thanks a lot for your time.